Welcome back to our students. I'm Mr. Martinez.
I'm Ms. Garcia.
And this is History Talks. If you don't remember at this point what a history talk is, I don't know what's going on with you. But at this point, if you don't remember, history talks are those opportunities where your lecture videos are packaged together in a nice Edpuzzle that you can go through as many times as you need to, as long, of course, is that the fact that you are going through it and answering any of the paused video questions that are embedded in. We do have a great conversation that we're going to continue here as a part 2 to our unit on the Cold War. Last time we talked about the beginning parts of it and potentially the causes and why it's called the Cold War. Now we're going to look at its actions taking place in the first area, which is Europe. Take a look at our timeline here, folks. These are the main concepts that we're going to be focusing on. As you guys can see, all of this starts to happen immediately after World War II ends. The two superpowers emerge and they learn very quickly that they do not want to coexist in the same world and would rather compete. That's where we see the first alliance break apart, where then we see Soviet aggression and American reactions to it. We're also going to focus on how these actions and feelings start to divide up Germany. Later, looking more into the Cold War divisions in Europe and how it spreads further. And lastly, some of the damaging impacts of the Cold War with the arms race and space race included.
All right, boys and girls, so let's go ahead and take a look at about how we end up from World War II, where everybody is somewhat getting along, to alliances breaking apart. You'll notice that we have two maps here, and those are kind of going to outline the divisions that are occurring in Europe. A little bit of background: the Soviets and the United States were able to cooperate during World War II. However, tensions rose after due to a lack of trust and conflicting political and economic ideologies. The United States issued an embargo that affected Russia, so it's messing with their money. Another thing, Russians became a large number of casualties because of the U.S. late intervention in World War II. So Russia's salty about that. They lost a lot of people because the United States waited so long to get involved. Another thing is the Soviets were not included in the reconstruction of Japan. Now, all of these things are creating further tensions where the United States and the Soviet Union already did not get along. And by making these decisions, it's getting even worse. Stalin's goals for the Soviet Union were also contrary to what the United States had in mind. Stalin wanted to spread communism to the surrounding areas, and the United States did not want that. He also wanted to create a buffer zone of Soviet sympathetic countries between Russia and Germany. He wanted to create a buffer between the Democrats or democratic nations and himself. Also, the Soviet occupation post-World War II. When the Nazis were defeated, the Soviets placed them as occupants in Eastern Europe. So in a lot of places, Nazis were replaced by Soviets. Also, we have local communist parties were supported by the Soviet Union, and anti-communist parties were removed, often by force by the Soviets.
Very nice. So we're starting to see some of these initial actions by the Soviet Union. But let's go ahead and do a quick checkpoint. Why was there growing tensions that led to the alliance breakaway between US and USSR? What are those fundamental reasons why those two did break apart after World War II? Answer that question to move forward. Perfect. Let's go ahead and continue. So now we're starting to see these growing aggressions. There's far more that happen immediately after World War II. Once again, Stalin is trying to create these buffer states in Eastern Europe as a way of trying to protect Russia from getting invaded again from any enemies from the Western world. So there's more aggression that we see. Soviet aggression grows, especially in Greece, as Stalin backed up communist rebels who were fighting to overturn a right-wing monarchy supported by Britain. They start to get involved in other countries in trying to promote communism as their main system. By 1947, however, Britain could no longer afford to defend Greece, Stalin was also a menace to Turkey and many other vital trading regions within that area. Now, within all of these first initial actions by Stalin to try to recruit as many of these new countries that were once under Nazi occupation into Soviet occupation, you start to see a lot of the Western powers get upset. And this is where we hear a very coined word that comes within this whole Cold War conversation, the Iron Curtain. In 1946, Winston Churchill, former Prime Minister of Britain, was speaking on how the Soviet Union was sealing off the countries in Eastern Europe that its armies had occupied at the end of World War II. He said an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent, meaning that there was this huge division between now what is considered the free world and the communist world. This becomes a huge moment in a lot of people's thinking on what this whole war is going to look like and who is on whose team when it comes to it. Iron Curtain became a symbol of the Cold War fear of communism. It described the division in Europe into the Eastern and Western Bloc. So if we ever talk East or Eastern Europe, we're talking about places the Soviets own that are now subscribed to communism, either because they like it or because they're being forced to like it. On the Western worlds, or West, we're talking about Western democracies or capitalism countries. These are typically led by United States and Western powers.
So again, our checkpoint question for today in this section is, what's the Iron Curtain? Tell us in your best guess, educated guess, complete sentences. What is the Iron Curtain?
Please answer that to continue forward. Lovely. Thank you so much for talking about that symbolism of fear of communism and how that becomes a big moment in this whole Cold War scale.
So we have the United States and their reaction to the Soviet aggressions during the onset of the Cold War. The United States had this particular view. They believed that communism was evil and it was a threat to democracy. It was not something that they wanted or believed in. So the United States establishes the Truman Doctrine in 1947. It was rooted in the idea of containment, right? So just like you have a container, a Tupperware, you want to hold it in there. You want to keep it contained. That's what they want to do with communism. They don't want it to spread. They want to keep it contained. They're limiting communism to the areas already under Soviet control. Stalin, however, saw containment as encirclement by the capitalist world and wanted to isolate the Soviet Union. Americans were committed to resist Soviet expansion in Europe or elsewhere in the world. Also, the Americans would intervene with economic aid and U.S. advisors, specifically in Greece and Turkey. So the United States was heavily involved in trying to contain communism, and the Soviets were very upset about that. They did not think that that was fair of them. We also have the Marshall Plan by the United States, where they led aid to European nations in rebuilding their economies post-World War II in order to prevent the temptation of communism and strengthen democracies in Europe. They provided food, economic assistance, but in places where communism was already existing or where they were sympathetic to Stalin and the Soviet Union, Stalin forbid anybody from taking any assistance from the United States.
Very interesting. Let's go ahead and take a moment to see a little bit more about the Truman Doctrine, as this is the first big policy announcement about how America is going to handle communism. Perfect. Thank you for watching that video. Hopefully now you have a bit of an idea of what were these initial reactions America had with the spread of communism. Checkpoint, real quick. How did the US react to the growing aggressions for the Soviet Union? Can you please answer this question to check that you did recognize some of these initial reactions to the spread of communism? Well done. Thank you. But there's a lot more that goes down in Europe. With this announcement of the Truman Doctrine, which is promoting containment, Stalin starts to become more emboldened and more aggressive about this idea of trying to get as much people to join him willingly or unwillingly, so that he had more people on his team. And with Germany being the center point of diplomatic situations, as there are so many different countries that owned Germany after World War II, as you guys can see from that picture, this is what I mean. Germany is completely occupied by different countries as they try to restabilize Germany without fascism. With this came drama. Berlin is the capital of Germany, okay? This city is going to be divided, literally divided, with a physical barrier called the Berlin Wall that is erected by the Soviets as a way of showing their hardline stance against the idea of cooperating or working with democratic nations. The city is divided into different zones of occupation, like I just mentioned, but it's this eastern Berlin side that is completely walled off. The side, of course, owned by the communists. Now, looking at the drama of Berlin, you're going to notice that things are going to go down a lot more than just the wall being created. That creates so much havoc for the people who live in that city, as whatever day you were on that day of that wall is where you are now a permanent resident of either the free world or the communist world. And this wall is going to last for 40 years. But the reason behind the creation of the Berlin Wall is one, of course, to stop the diplomatic conversations with the Western powers, and two, to stop a lot of the immigration that was starting to happen. As a lot of these Eastern German citizens were definitely not happy with communism and were trying to make it over to the free world or the Western German side. So the Soviets figured out a quick solution: create a wall that will separate the two and monitor it as a border of a nation. This becomes a huge issue that leads to a fight between the United States and Soviet Union called the Berlin Airlift. Now, not a fight necessarily with bullets, but different tactics in which to try to still get their influence in there, even though there's this great line of division between the two. Let's go ahead and watch a video that shows that rise of the Berlin Wall and inevitably the crash of it far later, 40 years after.
So we continue to have a divided Germany, those in the east and those in the west. But tensions continue to rise. In the Berlin Airlift of 1948, even though Berlin lay deep within the Soviet zone, the former German capital was occupied by all four victorious allies. Remember, we had France, Britain, and the United States occupying the west, and we have the Soviet Union occupying the east. Stalin tried to force the Western allies completely out of Berlin by sealing every railroad and highway into the western city, so there was no way for the allies to reach any parts of Berlin. However, the Western powers responded to the blockade by mounting a round-the-clock airlift. For more than a year, cargo planes supplied West Berliners with food and fuel. Their success forced the Soviets to end the blockade. Although the West had won a victory in the Cold War, the crisis deepened the hostility between the two camps. So let's recap. What happened? Well, Berlin is inside of Germany. Germany is controlled by the Soviets, but the United States, France, and Britain are still occupying areas of Berlin. What does the Soviets do? They lock them out. They close all the railroads, close all the roads, and nobody can get in. But the Allies are not going to be defeated so easily. They begin to send cargo ships, and they're airdropping foods and supplies for more than a year to the Berliners to keep them nourished and get the resources that they need. But it doesn't just stop there. Berlin is not the only place where people are unhappy with the occupation by the Soviets. Revolts begin to occur all throughout Eastern Europe. In Eastern Germany, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, there's unrest amongst the people. They begin to revolt against the Soviets. Unfortunately, the Soviets respond by sending troops and executing many of the leaders of the revolts in those areas.
Interesting. So let's look at this really intense operation of the Berlin Airlift. Perfect. Thank you for watching that video with us. Quick checkpoint. What happened in Germany after World War II? So much can be said at this point, but what can you tell us that happened in Germany after World War II? Perfect. Let's move on. So, like we see, the issues in Europe are getting far more deadly. They're getting far more tense, and the tensions are rising a lot more. But it doesn't just stay in Europe, folks. The Cold War is a global incident. And you're going to see that many people are going to be called into the duty of joining one of these teams, the Warsaw Pact or NATO. Nations are going to have to decide which one are they going to be a part of. Now, when we say NATO, NATO means Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is a world organization that was created in 1949. Countries like United States, Canada, and 10 other countries formed a new military alliance called NATO, where they pledged to help one another in the name of democracy and capitalism. Now, while the Western powers are making their club, so are the Soviets. If they like it or not, they're joining a team called the Warsaw Pact of 1955, where the Soviet Union responded by forming its own military alliance, where this included not only the Soviet Union, but of course 7 satellite states that were under them in Eastern Europe. This becomes the communist team, and more people will potentially join this one in other parts of the continent. There becomes a huge propaganda war as these two teams are assembled. The United States spoke of defending capitalism and democracy against communism and totalitarianism. So United States talking badly about communism and totalitarianism, saying that they're going to take away your rights and liberty and everything else in between. At the same time, Soviet Union is claiming that the moral high ground in the struggle against the Western imperialism is happening at that moment, meaning that the Soviet Union, in their perspective, are the good guys fighting against all those imperialism and empire tendencies from those Western powers. And instead, the Soviet Union is like the power to the people movement is what they believe and what they start advertising to their side of the world. We start to notice that propaganda starts to create mass paranoia and mass hysteria among both societies. There is an emphasis a little bit on American society, especially with something called the Red Scare, which was a hysteria over the perceived threat posed by communists in the United States during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. So essentially, people were so afraid in America about communism that they started thinking their neighbors were communists and started fearing who was a loyal American and who was a commie. This has big issues for US society that you'll find out later on. But let's get a glimpse of it in this video.
Our checkpoint for this topic is, what increased the tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States? Tell us in a complete sentence, what do you think increased the tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States at this point?
Perfect. Now, with this conversation, there is another part of the subject that we do need to talk about, which is the arms race. Now, when we're talking arms, we're not talking hands, folks. We're talking weapons. Arms race occurred when 2 or more countries increase the size or quantity of their military resources to gain military or political superiority over one another. Essentially, when countries try to reinvent the next greatest weapon that will give them the upper hand on their enemies. Now, you can see how this is an issue during the Cold War, now with the development of nuclear weapons, as the United States and the Soviet Union, when they acquired how to make it, start to build up their nuclear arsenal, trying to one-up one another on who has enough missiles to destroy the other country. Now, the military threat, you must imagine, is huge. The Industrial Revolution made it possible for the mass production of weaponry and the access to nuclear science. Now, this created a lot of great opportunities for energy consumption, but it also was a great opportunity for weaponry that we have never seen before. But it's not just nuclear weapons that are intense and scary during this time. There's other crazy inventions that help it that are also really concerning, like intercontinental ballistic missiles, the idea of missiles going long range, being able to go from one continent to another, even smaller ones like intermediate range ballistic missiles, and even being able to shoot missiles from submarines underwater. All this new technology is great, but it also creates a little bit more complexity and fear of what could happen if tensions rise. Talking spending, there is money being thrown into this. Both the United States and the Soviet Union are spending large amounts of money in order to fund this arms race, to have that upper hand on each other. How much money are we talking? Well, let's just say in 6 years, they're able to spend a cool $5.8 trillion with a T. So, huge investments. That's going to have a big impact later on. Overall, though, why do we not fire these missiles? Because we learned very quickly that when both sides have those missiles that can cause mass destruction, it's almost like a lose-lose situation if there was actually a war. It's something called mutually assured destruction, or MAD theory, which is this idea that the principle of deterrence founded on the nation that a nuclear attack by one superior or superpower would be met with an overwhelming nuclear counterstrike such that both the attacker and defender would be annihilated. So essentially saying, if both have the capabilities of shooting the missile, you would have to really make sure, if you're the one first firing, that you got them all out and destroyed on that first round, because they're going to fire their missiles and you will pay the same price that you made them, which has that reluctancy to want to actually fire any missiles at all. Let's take a quick video at seeing what the arms race looks like. Now, besides just the arms race, the whole MAD theory is a really interesting one. Take a look at this video that highlights a little bit more into mutually assured destruction. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I am genuinely afraid of the idea of such atomic warfare actually happening. What do people do to prepare themselves during such a thing? What does the government tell its citizens to do if there was ever a time that a missile was incoming to their place and they must get ready for annihilation? How can you protect yourself against annihilation? Watch this next video and see if we have a glimpse into that.
Okay, everyone, now that we have reviewed a lot of that new content and we've watched some videos, let's answer this checkpoint question. How did the United States and the USSR compete against each other? Tell us a little bit about what you saw, what you read, and what you heard. How did the United States and the Soviet Union compete against each other?
Awesome. Thank you for responding.
Okay. So we know that the Cold War begins almost immediately after World War II. In some points, they even overlap, okay? And one of those areas where they overlap is a thing called Operation Paperclip. It's where Nazi intelligence, after the end of World War II, both the United States and the Soviet governments were scrambling to acquire Nazi resources and intelligence. Now remember, when the Nazis surrender, both the Soviet Union and the United States are fighting to get into those areas. What are they actually fighting over? Well, they're looking for Nazi medical and scientific experimentation conducted during the Holocaust. They want access to that information because they fear if that Nazi information and intelligence falls into the opposite person's hands, then they will have access to those, and that can potentially be a military or political threat to themselves. Another thing that they are looking for is German scientists. Some of these men have been Nazi party members, SS officers, and war criminals. They were valued as vital to American national security under Operation Paperclip. So what is Operation Paperclip? It's a top secret operation to gather roughly 1,600 of these German scientists, along with their families. They were brought to the United States to work on America's behalf during the Cold War. So one more time, what was Operation Paperclip? It was the United States secret operation, and they were gathering up Nazi scientists in order to bring them to the United States to use their intelligence, their resources, and their science to help fund and promote the Cold War. One of those was Wernher von Braun. Von Braun and other rocket scientists were brought to Fort Bliss in Texas and White Sands Providing Grounds, New Mexico, as War Department special employees. They are here to assist the U.S. Army with rocket experimentation. Specifically, Von Braun later became director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. The U.S. justification for bringing Nazis to the United States was that the U.S. military believed Nazi intelligence and scientists would be taken by Soviets and could potentially create a military threat to the U.S., if not absorbed by the United States first. So, in essence, they believed it's better for us to have the Nazis than somebody else to have the Nazis. It's better for us to have Nazi information than somebody else to have Nazi information. That is Operation Paperclip.
Wow. So not only is there an arms race, but that arms race is created by almost a Nazi scientist race between the Soviets and United States. We're trying to gather these people who can create that next great technology. Crazy. Help us with this, guys, with a quick checkpoint. What was the purpose of Operation Paperclip? Remind us in this next point. Awesome. Now, arms race, Nazi scientist race, space race. That's right, folks. This technology doesn't just stay on Earth. It can make it now officially off of our planet. And the space race then becomes a thing during the Cold War. Now, the space race is an expansion of the arms race. Both the United States and the Soviet Union are now competing for dominance, not only on Earth, but within our atmosphere and orbit. Now, you would think that with all of this collection of Nazi intelligence, that maybe America or the Soviet Union are going to be the first ones in space. And you're absolutely correct. It's not who you think, though, who makes it up first. That's right. The first ever successful launching into space is actually from the Soviet Union. They beat us to the punch on actually making it to space. Not only with satellites, but even with the first man in orbit. But Sputnik, in October 4th of 1957, shocks the world as the Soviets announced that their technology is capable of getting to space with their intercontinental ballistic missile that was launched. This is the world's first ever artificial satellite that was man-made that is now orbiting around Earth. Huge deal for human history, but the credit does not go to the free world. No, sirree, it goes to the communists. Now, this upsets America, makes America throw as much money and as much investment as possible so they can match or even be better than the communists when they come to space exploration. So a few notable things that America does: Explorer 1 and the creation of NASA in 1958 becomes a thing where the US launched its own satellite called Explorer 1, designed by the US Army under the direction of the rocket scientists that we just heard from Ms. Garcia. The same year, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a public order creating National Aeronautics and Space Administration, a federal agency dedicated to space exploration, a new government committed to just space exploration and everything included with it. Now, entering space becomes a big deal. Shooting something into space, like technology and satellites, is cool, but getting the first person into space must be another grand accomplishment. One that does not go to America first. No, actually the Soviets in 1961 with their astronaut, Yuri, who actually is the first person to actually make it out into Earth, outside of Earth's orbit, and is the first person to succeed and get that accomplishment. America later on will also have its accomplishment, though. On July 16th of 1969, you do see our US astronaut Neil Armstrong and a few others who will set off to not only make a presence into our orbit, but even to our neighboring moon. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the space race. I don't know about you, Ms. Garcia, but I'm looking forward to space tourism someday in our lives. But this is the first creation of it that we're noticing. But when it comes to today's lesson, folks, that is it. We are officially done with our talk about the Cold War within Europe. we're going to go ahead and settle there on our lesson with what happens in Europe. There's some other things that do go on, but for now, this is the main key points. But we're going to notice the Cold War does not stay just in Europe. It starts spreading eastward into another arena, which is Asia. But until then, folks, that is enough from today when it comes to our lesson. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mr. Martinez.
I'm Ms. Garcia.
And we're all done for today. Make sure you do finish your notes and have a good day. We'll see you next time.